Please be seated. If you read biblical commentaries or even listen to Bible study groups talking about this passage, they just love to jump on James and John. Why those arrogant guys? Who are they to ask to sit at the right hand and the left hand of Jesus? I'll tell you who they were. They were the sons of thunder. I love that name, the sons of thunder, the two sons of Zebedee, two of Jesus' first disciples, and along with Peter, kind of the special three who got to go places the others didn't get to go. First of all, you were in a pretty select crowd if you were one of the 12 apostles, the first 12 disciples. And then to be Peter, James, or John, and to get the special invitations to the transfiguration and to certain healings that others did not get. They were special. They were privileged. And what a lot of people hear and their request is, we're special and we want to be in that throne in heaven with you. Now, we have the advantage of dramatic irony because of the distance from the life of Jesus. We now know what Jesus meant the 3 times in the Gospel of Mark when he says to his disciples, I am going to be arrested. They will mock me, spit upon me, flog me, and kill me. And we know that that actually will happen, and that Jesus will be resurrected, and that the history of the world will change forever. They did not know that. They understood that he was the Messiah. They didn't really have a clear picture of what was going to happen, but what they had was a deep and intimate friendship with Jesus. So you can hear that as, we're the sons of thunder, let us sit next to you on your throne of glory. Or you can hear, we want to be wherever you are, and we're your guys, and we're going to be on your left and right-hand sides. Clearly, the other disciples took it as an insult that they were somehow better than the rest. But they recognized that in many ways they were privileged. They were special. They just didn't understand what the messiahship of Jesus was like, or what it was going to be like for them. Notice what Jesus asks them. He says, can you drink from the same cup from which I will drink? Now you might ask, what does he mean? Jesus often uses the cup symbolically and literally, and it is referred to symbolically throughout the Bible. It's positive in some context. For example, the cup of salvation in Psalm 116, my favorite psalm of all time. I will raise the cup of salvation. It's a cup of celebration, of thanksgiving to God, thus our Eucharist every Sunday. But it is also referred to as the cup of God's wrath or the cup of suffering, something coming down upon people who have not been listening to God. I'm going to suggest to you that Jesus means the latter because in this gospel and all 3 of the other gospels, Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. And he means the cup of his upcoming suffering. He knows exactly what's planned for his life. He's getting scared at the last moment. He prays to God, maybe this isn't your will. But he goes along with it because completely aligned with God's will, because he is part of God, and he will always do what is perfectly God's will. So he goes along with it. He drinks from the cup of suffering that is his passion. Then he asks him a second question about baptism. Notice that he's covering the 2 main sacraments in Christian worship, baptism and Eucharist or communion of some sort. So he says, can you receive the same baptism with which I've been baptized? So what does he mean by that? Good question. Baptism can mean a lot of things. To some people, it means that they have recognized that they are sinners and that they need God's grace to get into heaven, to be saved, and so they are washed free of their sins, washed with the blood of the Lamb. That is one very traditional understanding of baptism, remains a traditional teaching about baptism. It is also understood as being included in the family of God, that it's the sacrament is an outward sign that the person is a child of God. And it can be their saying, I choose to follow, whether they're an old enough person or parents and godparents saying for a young child, I choose to follow Jesus, I choose to be a disciple. And then you remember we renew our baptismal vows as well, remember? So we're asked several questions and we say, I will with God's help. You remember that one, right? I will with God's help. The other way to think of baptism is dying. And it's not so obvious to us when we're pouring just a little bit of water on a person's forehead. It's more obvious when you see people getting dunked in rivers and lakes and oceans, that we are killing them. We are drowning them symbolically, putting them under the water to say we are dying to self and rising to a new life in our life with Jesus. You'll also see this sometimes at ordinations where the candidates fully prostrate their bodies flat on the ground. They are symbolizing dying and standing up a new person, more committed to following Jesus. I think Jesus meant that one. Because he says, are you willing to do this, what I'm going to do? And what Jesus has just announced in the previous 2 verses is, I'm going to die on the cross and be resurrected. And they, I think, not fully understanding what they're saying yes to, say, we are able. Now, interestingly, all around the country right now, there are rectors and priests in charge and interim rectors running around the congregation saying, would you be willing to serve on the vestry? Would you be willing to serve on the vestry? Would you run to be a delegate for convention? Would you be run to be a delegate for convention? And what do we hear? Where's the convention this year? How long would it take? Vestry? Like what part of vestry? I did it 10 years ago. Get somebody else to do it. Let me pray and think about that. I'll ask my kids and ask my wife. We are able. They said that without knowing the cost. They didn't know what he meant. Not really. It's obvious to us, but they didn't know entirely what he meant. But this is when I want to say they were the sons of thunder. What I hear in their we are able, these bold, brash, sometimes full of themselves guys, is whatever you need, we're going to do. We are able. And he said, okay. He didn't say, oh, you don't know. You don't think you're not going to be able to handle it. He said, then you will drink from that cup and you will be baptized with my baptism. And in fact, James, the brother of John, St. James, was martyred, Acts chapter 12. He was reported to have gone to Spain preaching the gospel and then returned to Jerusalem where Herod beheaded him. And when they started routing the Christians, sometime between the year 42 and 44. And the reason people go to Santiago de Compostela in Spain is that it is believed that his beheaded body was returned there and buried in a little village called Compostela, which is where our pilgrims are going tomorrow. So James very much did follow exactly in the baptism of Jesus and the cup of Jesus. The interesting thing about the kind of sacrifice that Jesus is talking about and the kind of suffering he's talking about is that it is consciously chosen. Jesus consciously chose to go through the passion. That prayer revealed that he was thinking, maybe not. Unless it's your will, all right, I will. The disciples chose when Jesus said, will you do this? They said, we will, we are able. They consciously chose suffering. They consciously chose self-sacrifice. The other types of suffering we don't choose. You get sick. Can't help that. Fires or floods or the loss of a good friend. You didn't choose any of those things. You suffer. But self-sacrifice is different because you lose something or you suffer for the sake of Christ to benefit someone. You may be caring for an aging parent. You may be providing free daycare to your grandchildren so your child can work. You may be caring for a dying friend or spouse or relative. And did you say, let me get back to you in a week about that? No, you said, I'm able, I'll do it. knowing there's a cost, but not counting the cost, because what you're serving, the loved one, whatever you're doing, is greater than your own self. You choose to die to self. You stop taking fancy vacations so your kids can be on the traveling volleyball team. There are all sorts of ways we sacrifice for one another in loving ways. So that kind of self-sacrifice where you choose, knowing there's going to be a cost, and yet you do it anyway, putting yourself aside for that. We have a beautiful example in a social media of our website this week. Harriet Tubman is featured in our social justice icon for the week. And as you know, Harriet Tubman escaped from slavery. And then, to people's amazement, she returned to places of grave danger with the Underground Railroad and became one of the most successful conductors on the Underground Railroad. She saved countless people's lives by risking her own life, putting her own skin in that game to make sure that others could be delivered as she had been delivered. She was a daughter of thunder, right? A major force. Most of us are not called to martyrdom or to even that level of sacrifice, but I believe that there are things happening in our midst all the time where we are called to rise above our self-interest to help others. I'll give you an example from my own life. Sometime in my 30s, living in the Bay Area, I had just gotten the Motorola Razr phone. Remember the Razr? It was a flip version, one of the new flip versions. It was one of the best ones you could get. I was so happy to have my Motorola Razr. And very soon after I had it, I was sitting in my car, getting out, on the driveway, and the car fell only about 1.5 feet out of my pocket onto the cement driveway. And when I opened it, the Motorola didn't work anymore. I'd only had it a month. So I told a friend of mine who worked for another cell phone company, and she goes, "Oh, don't tell him what happened. Just take it in and say, 'Lousy phone, give me another.'" I said, "Well, that doesn't sound like the right thing to do." So I go to the Verizon store, and I said, "Hey, this is what happened. It fell out, but there was no damage. You couldn't see any marks on the phone. It had barely fallen a foot even." And he said, "Oh, these things are breaking all the time. Just take it to the store. Don't need to tell him what happened. Just say it doesn't work. Give me another." So I thought, well, we'll see what happens. So I go to the store where the repairs are, and I'm standing in line, and I'm in this line, and there's a gentleman right here. He is Latino. He's wearing denim jeans, and he's got grass stains along the back of his pants. And I thought he probably owned a landscaping business. So I'm waiting, and he's already being helped by a young white man. He says, "My phone stopped working. I need another." And the man says, "This is the second time. No, this is the third time you've come in to get that phone repaired. I don't believe it. I think you've been dropping it at work, and you're just coming in and trying to get a free phone out of us." And I'm watching this going, this is blatant racism. I'm sure this is blatant racism. And so the man just very calmly stands there and says, "No, I did not drop it. It's just stopped working." So he says, "Well, we'll see about that." And he goes, "I'm going to talk to the manager." And right then I get called up to my person, and she says to me, "What seems to be the problem?" And I said, "My phone stopped working." And I figured if she said, "Did you drop it?" or whatever, I would say, "Yes, I did." But I was hoping she wouldn't. And she looks at it and says, "No damage to the phone. We'll get you another." Well, he's standing right there listening to that. And all of a sudden, I feel overcome with, I need to say something. I need to say, "Why are you, without question, giving me another?" He says the exact same thing, and you are giving him a hard time. Look at that. So, just as I'm about to say, "Hey, why?" and I actually said, "Hey, why?" and then the young white man comes out and says, "Okay," the manager says, "Fine, but that's the last phone you get from us," shaking his finger at a man who's several years older than him. So I look at him, and I'm thinking, well, he's a proud man. I'm sure he doesn't need me to defend him, so I guess I just won't say anything. He gets his phone, walks out. I get my phone, I walk out, and about 10 steps out of the store, it just comes upon me that I did nothing. I said nothing in the face of blatant racism. And while I was thinking I was protecting that man's dignity, I actually did have that thought that I was protecting his dignity by not defending him. I realized that I probably would have done him a much greater favor and the people in that store if I had called them out on it with him present to say, you can't treat people that way. Why are we getting different treatment? And then I asked myself, why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted a free phone. That's why I didn't say anything. I didn't want to rock the boat. I just wanted to get my phone and go. I had to get back to work. I was busy. It was a chance. It was a chance. But what I learned from that was, you're not ever going to do that again, Janine. You see something, you're going to say it, no matter what the cost. Because that's what we say we're going to do in our baptismal covenant, right? Seek the peace and justice for God's world and to respect the dignity of every human being. I will, with God's help. I've said it 1,000,000 times. One of the things that was most life-giving to me in my life in San Diego was that in 2019, the Episcopal Church released this curriculum called Sacred Ground, which is part of the Blessed Community movement in the Episcopal Church to work against racism, to help defeat racism in the church and in the world. And I had been working on issues related to race and being very involved with immigration and working with an organization called Faith in Action that my church wasn't quite comfortable joining, although we're comfortable helping immigrants in ways I asked them to do. And so when Sacred Ground came about, I said to the church leaders, hey, what about doing this education program in small groups throughout the church? And they said yes. So in February of 2020, I'm trying to remember when it was. Yes, February 2020, a fateful month, a month before the world, fell apart. We had a diocesan-wide education weekend that we do every year in San Diego. And I presented Sacred Ground along with the president of the Union of Black Episcopalians and another priest who was working on spreading Sacred Ground throughout the church. And we were saying, it's free, it's easy. Priests don't have to do anything. You just say, go, form small groups, here's the curriculum. And I told them, it's already changing the life of my church substantially, because what the curriculum does is that it reveals, in purely factual terms, just historical terms, the systemic racism in the United States from its roots, and that it continues in this day. Legal decisions like Chinese can't come to this country, and we're shutting down the border, and black people can't belong to trade unions, things like that, things that were law. They were laws in this country. And I remember people just saying, now I realize, now I see when we talk about white privilege, it's just a thing that's out there in the history and the culture of our country. It's surrounding us. So I was recommending it to the other churches, and several clergy colleagues came up to me and said, it's not right. This is going to rock the boat too much at my church. They're not ready for this. And I said, I'm not sure what you mean by ready. I mean, my church is we've got 45 people doing it, and now other people are saying, I want my own group, because everybody's saying what a great program it is. They said, it's just not time. Maybe we'll do a book study, but we're not ready for this. Well, fast forward to May of 2020. We've now all been in our homes in lockdown for 2 months. That was fun. And we all watch George Floyd being murdered around the world on TV. The first thing that happens is I get phone calls and emails from 3 of my Sacred Ground groups saying, we can't just watch videos and talk about this. We need to do something. How do we do something? I said, well, there's this organization I've been working with, and we could work with them. They're working on it all the time. They said, sign us up. We're joining now. The next thing that happened is I start getting emails from rectors all over the diocese saying, hey, that Sacred Ground curriculum, we need to get started. It was the baptism of Jesus that George Floyd experienced. And then our eyes were opened, and we've been transformed. We have been transformed. Everyone who's done that curriculum has been transformed, and the nation is looking at itself in different ways. when we make those baptismal vows, we repeat them whenever there's a baptism, for example, we're sort of going through the routine of saying them. But what we're really doing is re-upping that moment when Jesus says, can you drink from the cup that I drink from? Can you have the baptism with which I am baptized? Will we? We will, with God's help.